a wealthy entrepreneur found murdered in his waterfront home.
He was laying face down with his hands kind of tucked up under his pillows.
The entire house had been ransacked.
It didn't appear there was any struggle. It didn't look like he saw it coming.
As leads go cold, investigators turn to the victim's loved ones for answers.
Everybody loved Dad. Nobody hated Dad. There were so many feelings. I didn't even believe it.
But the investigation reveals a family man who lived a bachelor's lifestyle.
He enjoyed his life, he enjoyed partying.
It looked as if he had engaged with somebody to essentially set up a date.
Those messages were very clearly talking about money.
And when detectives zero in on a suspect, it leads to a desperate manhunt that will take them over 3,000 miles away.
She liked shiny things. She liked driving around in a Mercedes.
I think it was premeditated, 100%.
I just kept telling her your best bet is to turn yourself in, because if you're running from something, it's just going to make it so much worse.
March 3rd, 2021, Clackamas County, Oregon. At 11:28 a.m., a 911 call is made from an upscale home on the Willamette River.
How can I help you?
I came over to my boss's house and I found him and he's dead.
Okay. Is he cold to the touch or stiff?
I didn't touch him, but he's in a pool of blood.
The caller, Tony Morrell, says he became concerned for 62-year-old Jimmy Pearson after not hearing from him for several days.
Mr. Merrill was not only his friend, but he also worked for him. He found Mr. Pearson naked, and he had blood all pooling all around his head. As soon as he saw the blood, he got scared, exited the residence, and then called 911.
This call originally was dispatched to Deputy Fredrickson. He's one of our patrol deputies. He responded to the scene. It was a very nice home in a very nice neighborhood. The residence's driveways are gated, so you have to have a code to get into the driveway of the residence. It's a very nice home. It's very large.
Deputy Fredrickson enters the master bedroom, where he finds an unresponsive male victim lying on the bed.
He was laying face down with his hands kind of up over his head, tucked up under his pillows. Deputy Fredrickson could see the blood around his head area on the bed.
A swift search of the bedroom confirms the victim is the owner of the house, Jimmy Pearson.
Deputy Fredrickson did find a wallet on the nightstand, which had an ID card in it, and the ID card appeared to match the deceased person on the bed. Deputy Fredrickson moved one of the pillows to see if there was any firearm. Because the amount of blood, I think he was guessing that it may have been a gunshot wound.
He couldn't determine where the blood was coming from, and he didn't know if it was self-inflicted.
After a preliminary search of the scene, no weapon is located. However, there are signs of what looks like a break-in.
The entire house had been ransacked, drawers opened, things obviously missing, like someone had gone through just about every room and looked through everything.
Homicide detectives quickly arrive, accompanied by the medical examiner.
One of the things we noticed when we walked into his bedroom is that there was a really pungent smell of decomposition, so we knew he had been dead for several days.
As they were examining the body, they did find what appeared to be a bullet wound to the back of the deceased's head.
Until the medical examiner could conduct their pathology exam, we weren't going to be able to 100% say that he died of a homicide. But we were treating it as a homicide. People, when they commit suicide, don't typically shoot themselves in the back of the head.
There were no weapons. There were a lot of unknowns. So trying to find out when something occurred is one of our first steps. reaching out to family, friends, anybody that can give us an indication of where they've been, what they've been doing, and who they've been spending time with.
Jimmy Pearson was born August 19, 1957, in Dearborn, Michigan. He was one of 4 siblings, and their home life was anything but perfect.
His dad was Al Pearson. He played professional hockey for the Detroit Red Wings. However, he was an alcoholic, so that put a damper on his mom and his relationship. So his mother ended up divorcing his dad when he was very young.
Faced with raising the children on her own, Jimmy's mother moved them to Oregon in search of a fresh start.
She had 4 kids, so she spent a lot of hours at work, and they pretty much had to fend for themselves.
He saw his mom working all the time, so he thought he could help out. He, at a young age, would be out mowing lawns, doing whatever he could to provide, to bring in money.
By his early 20s, Jimmy was a hard-working, ambitious young man ready to start a family of his own.
I met Jimmy in the summer that I turned 18, and I met him at a houseboat. My sister was dating somebody who was a good friend of Jimmy's. After we started dating, he had opened up Hawkeye Trading Post, buy, sell, trade. That was his first little foot in the door to, being in the pawn shop business.
Jimmy and Sandra married in 1987 and had 2 children together. But his dedication to work put a strain on the relationship.
Jimmy was a good father when he was around because he worked a lot. Like, he would leave in the morning and sometimes not come back until 1 or 2 in the morning. There's not one thing that led to the divorce. It was a lot of different things. It was a mutual agreement that it was better for us to split. However, when we got divorced, we still were friends.
Jimmy lived with his family for a few years until one of his business ventures got him into trouble with the law in 1992.
The DEA came out to our door like at 6 in the morning. They toted Jimmy out of there within the first half hour. They had a warrant for his arrest for manufacturing and growing marijuana.
Jimmy was convicted on drug charges and spent 3 years in prison. When he got out, Jimmy was anxious to reunite with his children and rebuild his pawn business.
He got a deal at a place out in Gladstone, a property. We named it A1 Hawk.
A1 Hawk is a state licensed pawn shop, and we buy and sell goods and also do 90-day collateral loans. So from open to close, we're buying inventory off of customers or we're selling inventory to customers.
As soon as his daughters could see over the counter, they came to work with him.
We would ask him for money, and he would say, well, how many hours have you worked? When I first started, I was very shy and I was timid, and I was scared to go out on the sales floor. I'd ask my dad a question in fear, like, Dad, what do I say? He's like, just go in there and tell everybody that there's a new sheriff in town, and act like you own the joint.
The business was a success, and Jimmy expanded to 3 locations. By 2021, Jimmy used the considerable wealth he'd earned to spoil his growing family as his daughters had started families of their own.
He didn't flaunt wealth. He didn't come off pretentious. He definitely used his money for fun. He had 2 houses. One was a floating home, one was just on the bank there, and I remember regularly working on that house and just being awestruck, like, how do you attain these properties?
He seemed like he was happy. Jimmy was a selfless person. He wanted it to be known that A1 Hawk wasn't like other pawn shops and to break the stigma behind most standard corporate pawn shops.
But this doting grandfather and entrepreneur has been found dead inside his sprawling riverfront mansion, and investigators are trying to determine why.
There was no firearm located anywhere. There was no shell casing located anywhere. So that led us to believe that, well, one, he couldn't have killed himself.
They did find 2 drink cups in the bedroom that, most people don't drink out of 2 different glasses of the same type of drink. So it would indicate that there was a second person there. One of the detectives went into the bathroom and found some prescriptions with the name Talia McDaniel.
He had his underwear and his socks on the floor, and I think he had his shirt draped over at the edge of the bed, so it appeared as though he had disrobed and gotten into bed.
It was very likely that the person that killed him was someone that was familiar to him. And it didn't appear there was any struggle. It didn't look like Mr. Pearson saw it coming.
Coming up, an old flame becomes a person of interest.
There was this falling out where money and possessions were taken.
And detectives access a crucial piece of evidence.
As we were looking through the ring footage on Mr. Pearson's phone, we found a female getting out of the vehicle and coming to the front door.
After Oregon detectives search 63-year-old Jimmy Pearson's ransacked bedroom, they suspect he was likely robbed and murdered in his own home.
We were aware that he had owned A1 Hawk pawn locations, and so the belief that because he was the owner of these locations that he would potentially have jewelry or cash on hand.
But it surely looked like somebody had gone through a lot of Mr. Pearson's possessions. When we noticed that he had the ring camera outside the front, we knew that it was likely going to capture whoever killed him. If they came in through the front door, we'd be able to see who did it and at what time the homicide occurred. We needed to gain access to Mr. Pearson's cell phone to gain access to the cameras. The issue was that the phone had a pass lock, so we couldn't get into the phone. So that was a little bit of a challenge.
During the search, 3 of Jimmy's associates have gathered in the driveway.
Mr. Merrill told us that after calling 911, he then called Mr. Pearson's attorney, his paralegal. They both came to the scene.
Detectives step outside to speak with them, starting with Tony.
He indicated that he had known Mr. Pearson for well over 20 years.
Mr. Merrill told investigators that the last time he had saw Mr. Pearson was they had gone to a casino.
They had spent some time up there gambling, eating, and in the early morning hours on February 27th, Mr. Merrill left Mr. Pearson at the casino. He said that was the last time that he had communicated with Mr. Pearson.
On March 3rd, he found it odd that he still had not heard from Mr. Pearson, and actually nobody had heard from him in a couple days. So Mr. Merrill decided he wanted to go inside and check to see if Mr. Pearson was okay.
He said he had access to the garage code. He noticed that the dog food dish was empty, or water bowl was empty. Took care of the dog, fed, water, took it out potty, and then he went to Mr. Pearson's room.
After Tony finishes detailing the events leading up to finding his deceased friend, detectives turn to Jimmy's attorney.
I was asking him a myriad of questions about Mr. Pearson's past and about who would want to harm him. Although he didn't try to throw shade, he indicated that there was a bit of a falling out between Mr. Pearson and his daughters over Mr. Pearson's personal life.
And he had known Mr. Pearson for a long time. They had become friends. He was now his wills and estates lawyer and had written a will for him recently in which he had essentially disinherited his 2 daughters.
The attorney says Jimmy decided to leave his fortune to himself and another friend rather than family.
He handed me his amended will that had just happened within a couple months prior to that, which to me was a little odd. Although it was suspicious how we were introduced, their cooperation led us to believe that his attorney didn't have anything to do with it. Anything that we needed or requested, they were quick to help us with. We asked her, because she knew a lot of Mr. Pearson's affairs, do you know what Mr. Pearson's passcode is? And at first she stated no, but they said, I might be able to locate it. She said one of the people that had access to Mr. Pearson's house was Mr. Pearson's housekeeper, and would come every Monday. Since it was Wednesday at the time, we knew that Monday had just happened.
Investigators place a call to the housekeeper, hoping she might have seen something.
She had been there between the hours of 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. She said she entered the residence through the front door. She has the key Mr. Pearson provided her. She heard loud music coming from the direction of Mr. Pearson's room. She went to go check on Mr. Pearson, opened the door and saw his feet. Thought, oh, he's asleep, I don't want to bother him. So she's the one that actually shut the door, and she proceeded to clean the residence. I asked her, well, while you were there, did anything look odd or out of place or unusual? And the first thing she told me was, hey, you know what? When I was folding clothes, I noticed that there was some women's clothing that I was folding.
Mr. Pearson's housekeeper says it used to be a common occurrence, back when he was dating a woman named Tylea McDaniel.
He had a prior relationship with her, and when Tylea was living with Mr. Pearson, it was very common to see her clothing amongst Mr. Pearson's in the dryer. But that had been about a year prior.
To detectives, the name sounds familiar.
They had found prescription bottles that had belonged to a woman named Tylea McDaniel.
Detectives now aim to track down Ms. McDaniel to determine if she had a motive to harm Jimmy Pearson.
Obviously, that was a name that popped into our periphery as potentially being involved in this.
So when we looked up Mr. Pearson's name, we did find a report where he had claims that he'd been the victim of a burglary. He had listed Tylea McDaniel as stealing from him, and we started to believe that that may be who we needed to find.
The day after Jimmy Pearson was found dead, investigators interview his daughters, Sarah and Tanya Pearson.
They said they believed that he was murdered. And that was... can't even say the feeling. There were so many feelings. I didn't even believe it.
I asked them questions about, hey, tell me about your dad, tell me about your dad's dealings, who he associated with.
Everybody loved Dad. Nobody hated Dad.
Mr. Pearson's daughter's interview was enlightening. They explained why the fallout with their father, and a lot of it had to do with the people he was keeping company with. They didn't like the females that he was around. They described as their feelings were they were potentially escorts.
The only person that came to my mind was Tylea. We started dating a young woman, and I believe she was around 20 years old. We would ask, how did you guys meet? She said it was like in the movie. We were at a grocery store, our carts hit, and then he got my number. She didn't have a job, didn't have a car, didn't have a driver's license. She had nothing. Whether she was nice, great, she's nice. But you're gonna invite this person into your home? Into your business?
Their concern was that she was a bad influence on Mr. Pearson, and that kind of wasn't the type of grandfather that they wanted their children to be around.
As a result, Sarah quit working at the pawn shop, and her suspicions about Tylea grew.
I found out about a month later that my dad thought she took off with a whole bunch of cash and valuables at his house.
There was a report of a theft from this house about a year ago. That case was reported, but no charges were ever filed.
After the robbery, Jimmy broke off the relationship, but the rift between him and his daughters continued to grow.
It had to do with Jimmy feeling like they were trying to take over his life and tell him what to do. He enjoyed his life, he enjoyed partying, and wasn't going to listen to his daughters trying to convince him otherwise.
Despite their problems, Sarah and Tanya tell detectives they were unaware their father had written them out of his will.
They said that we would be getting a call from his lawyer and they would be reading his testimony. When it rains, it pours. And there were so many questions, but my only question was, what happened to my dad?
That day, the medical examiner conducts an autopsy that will answer their question.
It was determined that Mr. Pearson was shot once in the back of the head.
A bullet was removed, and it was identified as a .38 Special Slug.
Now that Jimmy's cause of death is confirmed, investigators are eager to track down the person who pulled the trigger.
This paralegal, she contacted us, provided us the passcode, and when we entered it, thankfully it unlocked his phone. We were able to gain access to Mr. Pearson's text messages and also the Ring camera app.
But none of the messages are from Tylea.
The last read message was from Paris Royal Natasha.
It looked as if he had engaged with somebody to essentially set up a date for someone to come to his house. There was an exchange of messages of, are you here? Or, how far out are you, essentially?
Previous messages spell out the nature of the relationship.
Those messages were very clearly talking about money and them getting together and exchanging money for the time they spent together, which led us to believe that he was paying for her services as an escort. As we were looking through the Ring footage, we found a vehicle arriving at his house and a female getting out of the vehicle and coming to the front door.
Investigators are uncertain who the woman arriving is, but one thing is clear. She is not Tylea McDaniel.
They're two different sized people. They look very different, and it was clear that that was not who we were looking at. Miss McDaniel was no longer really on our radar.
Paris Royal Nistasha, that's not a typical name that we tend to hear. So we had a feeling that that was likely not a real name. So one of the things that we did was we did a search, a law enforcement search of the phone number itself.
We were able to associate that phone number with a Nistasha-Tate.
We utilized her driver's license photo, which we were able to use to compare to the person we saw in the Ring camera video.
She was wearing like a dark-colored sweatshirt and jeans and was carrying a bag with her. When she went to the door, Mr. Pearson greeted her, and then they went inside.
Two hours later, around 2:42 a.m., the footage shows Nistasha leaving the home.
She comes back out and has the same red duffel bag in her hand, and it appears to be extremely full and heavy. In her right hand, it looks like she has maybe some reusable shopping bags or something else, not items that she had originally shown up with, but things that came from inside the home.
She makes several trips of carrying bags and boxes to her vehicle, put things in the vehicle.
It appeared she was wearing gloves, which was odd.
It was very clear that by the condition in which she found the house, how it looked like it had been ransacked, that Nistasha was looking for any valuable she could to sell.
This appears suspicious given the larger context of finding Mr. Pearson deceased. At that point, we're attempting to develop as much information about her as possible. Who is she? Are there any law enforcement contacts in the area with her?
A search of police records results in a hit on Nistasha's name.
She had been involved in a traffic stop 12 minutes after leaving Mr. Pearson's home.
The officer noted that there was a purse that was open on the front passenger seat of Nistasha's car, and that there was a revolver handgun that was sitting in plain view.
She explained she was in possession of the gun because she took it from a friend, and that's not legal to transfer a firearm. The firearm was seized and placed into evidence by Milwaukee police.
During the traffic stop, there was no reason to detain her, but to investigators, the implications are clear.
A bullet was found in Mr. Pearson's head. It was removed and it was identified as a .38 special slug. And knowing that Officer Sanchez had seized a .38 caliber revolver from Nistasha the prior night, that immediately led me to believe that that was likely a murder weapon.
Now, the suspect has about a 2-day lead on law enforcement, so they need to make up 2 days very quickly, because the longer this goes on, the more difficult it is going to be able to find her.
Less than 48 hours into their investigation, homicide detectives have landed on a suspect in the murder of Jimmy Pearson, an apparent escort named Nistasha-Tate. They send the evidence gathered so far for forensic testing.
We submitted the jacketed bullet that was recovered from Mr. Pearson's head. We submitted the firearm.
Police also obtain an arrest warrant for Nistasha, but they quickly realize she knows how to move under the radar.
The phone numbers that we had previously for her, we knew were no longer good. She was no longer using. And she worked as an exotic dancer at a couple different nightclubs, gentlemen's clubs. So we had detectives go to those different locations to see if we could find her vehicle. Unfortunately, her vehicle was not found at any of those places. So that became the primary focus of this investigation, is where is she at?
Social media being such a large part of pretty much everybody's lives these days, they were able to find not only her escort page, but her private social media page.
Nistasha's personal account indicates family members are also looking for her.
One of the messages was left by her grandmother that said something similar to, "What the heck, we were all very worried about you."
When investigators reach out to the grandmother, she puts them in touch with Nistasha's mother.
They learn that Miss Tate's mother is Teresa-Tate, and that she would be the person who would know where Nistasha-Tate is if anybody knew.
When investigators went and spoke to Teresa-Tate, she painted a pretty sad story of, what Nistasha's life had been. Had a pretty rough upbringing, couldn't read, couldn't write, had been introduced to prostitution at a fairly young age by a friend who she had kind of grown up with, who was a few years older.
She was very honest and upfront about, my daughter is associated with bad people. She's had multiple pimps. She has prostituted herself throughout the country.
She'd been trying to help her really get out of this world for a long period of time, but because Nistasha did not want that help, their communication had broken down.
Teresa said that Nistasha would only tell her very little about where she was. She would never tell her anything specific.
She said she's hidden in the past and laid low, but not really to this extent. Nistasha had spent time in Los Angeles, Minnesota, New York, Florida, Nevada. So really, she could have been anywhere.
When I left my business card and my phone number, and I told her, hey, if her daughter reached out to her, to let me know so that we can try to follow up. And she told us she would.
To aid in their search, detectives enlist the U.S. Marshals Service. They also file subpoenas for Nistasha's social media accounts.
When those records were received, they were also very enlightening.
She stated that she was looking for a gun from somebody. Another one was like almost an invitation to another person, like, hey, can you come join me to do this lick?
In the day before and even the day of Mr. Pearson's death and the time that she was at his house, she was reaching out to multiple people on Facebook talking about a big lick, kind of a big score.
And looking at Nistasha's social media, she liked shiny things. She liked driving around in a Mercedes. She liked to have possessions. It led us to believe that primary motivator for what Nistasha did, it was greed, it was money.
The picture is becoming much more crystal clear that this was a planned event, that this wasn't something that she went there and it was a crime of passion. She intended to do this, and that she was setting herself up to do this to Mr. Pearson.
Coming up, detectives get a tip on Nistasha's location.
Did she say where she was headed?
North Carolina.
And Nistasha's mother makes a confession.
I just kept telling her your best bet is to get your taken care of and turn yourself in.
The hunt for Nistasha-Tate continues for a month with no sign of Jimmy Pearson's suspected killer. But on April 7th, 2021, investigators finally get a lead.
They put out this notice to all law enforcement they were looking for this Mercedes. And turns out that Mercedes ends up getting towed in Portland.
They made a call to the impound and said, do not release this vehicle to anybody. We're going to come down and get it.
That's when we were told that someone else had arrived and was trying to get the vehicle released to them. Turns out it was a friend of Nistasha-Tate's, and the tow company asked her to stick around, and detectives wanted to talk to her.
It turned out to be a woman named Monique.
Monique claims she bought the car from Nistasha a month prior.
She said she was finna leave town and she sold my car, and I said, I'll take it.
I stated, okay, do you know where Nistasha is now? And she stated that she didn't know where she was, but she and her boyfriend had driven Nistasha to a bus stop on March 11th. Did she say where she was headed?
North Carolina.
But according to Monique, Nistasha had an unexpected change of plans.
She did call me a couple days after she left, and she was in Florida. She was being really weird, and I kept saying, what's wrong? Like, what did you do? She's like, I can't tell you. I just got to get away. I just got to get away.
Detectives asked if there was any way that we could get a hold of her to try to track her down. Monique said that there really wasn't any clear way to get a hold of her because her number was changing and she was communicating on a Wi-Fi only phone. Learning that Nistasha-Tate was now potentially in Florida definitely added some complexity to the investigation. We couldn't be further away in Oregon from Florida.
2 days later, as detectives work with Florida police to locate Nistasha, her mother calls to request a meeting.
She didn't want us to meet at her residence. She said she didn't want her neighbors to see her talking to the police, so we met her in some parking lot at a shopping center. She informed us that she had been communicating periodically with her daughter, Nistasha, even though she told us she hadn't been hearing from her.
Teresa explains that she's been trying to convince her daughter to turn herself in.
I just kept telling her your best bet is to get your taken care of and turn yourself in, whatever it is. Because if you're running from something, it's just going to make it so much worse.
Hoping to pin down a location, detectives ask Teresa to make contact with Nistasha.
I'd be fine with that because that's the only way we're going to get her, and she needs to be God at this point. As much as it just feels so against the grain, I know it's the right thing to do for her anyway.
We left, and then a short time after we parted the company, she contacts Deputy Sanders, who's on the U.S. Marshals Task Force, and tells her, hey, FYI, she contacted me on the phone. So then we knew that that was a good number that we could use to try to track her.
Once they get that phone number, and they do what's called a trap and trace, and determined that she was in a bus stop not that far from the Tampa Bay Police Department. So then the Tampa Bay police officer went down there and went to the bus stop, and she stands out a little bit. She's got an unusual look to her and some tattoo on her face that's somewhat recognizable.
Nistasha is carrying the same sweatshirt detectives saw her sporting in the footage from Jimmy's doorbell camera.
It was a very distinct hoodie with some words on it, bougie or something along that line. The detectives got to keep an open mind to the possibility of a fight or a struggle.
They covertly took a picture of her in the area and sent it to detectives.
They sent to me, hey, is this her? And I was able to positively identify, yeah, that was her. At that point, I told them, yeah, that's her.
Once they confirmed that that was her, she was, cooperative, they then took her into custody.
I was called, told she's in custody, and travel arrangements were made for myself and my partner, Detective Michael Zacher, to fly out to Tampa, Florida immediately.
We went to an interview room and Nistasha was brought to us.
I would like a court-appointed lawyer.
I just want you to be aware that once we leave, that's basically your opportunity to tell us what happened, until trial happens.
Yeah, I'd still like an attorney.
Nistasha is charged with first-degree robbery and second-degree murder. While she's being extradited back to Oregon, Jimmy's family learns of the arrest.
We were so excited. Like, it was like we won the lottery.
They did give us the name, and then we, started looking it up because we'd never seen her before. She had 2 tattoos on her forehead.
There's no way. Dad hated tattoos. Dad did not associate with those kind of people, and there's just no way. We didn't believe it.
After a month-long investigation, 23-year-old Nistasha-Tate has been charged for the murder of Jimmy Pearson. As prosecutors prepare the case for trial, the evidence against her continues to grow.
All of the evidence from the ballistics are all indicating the gun that was in her car 12 minutes after she left the house is the gun that caused his death.
Prosecutors believe the shooting was part of a premeditated plan.
She, as the evidence would indicate, was influenced and manipulated and trafficked in her past. And this was her one opportunity to turn things around and take control on her own. But she needed money to do that.
But as the court date approaches, Nistasha decides to make a deal instead of going before a jury.
If we were to go to trial, we might not be able to prove the first-degree murder. Since we don't have any eyewitnesses as to what actually happened in there, it's all circumstantial evidence. We came to agreement that she would plead to second-degree murder, which is also a true life sentence, but with consideration of parole after 25 years.
We said that we would be fine with doing that plea if she would give us a statement as to what happened and how it happened and why it happened.
In December 2021, Nistasha gives Jimmy's family what they asked for.
Her statement was that she had been up a few nights on a binger, drinking and doing drugs, and that when she had gotten over there, they had a drink, and then they had went to the room and had a drink in there, and then she was going to give him a back massage, and she reached down into her bag and pulled out a gun, and he moved and it went off. And then she panicked and didn't know what to do.
She claims that it was an accident, yet she robbed him still and fled. If it was truly an accident, we probably would have made different choices.
She was looking for a gun. It's not self-defense. It's not an accident. It's something that was motivated by money and greed.
I don't believe it was even the truth of actually how things went down. I think it was premeditated, 100%.
She took away my dad. She took away my best friend, the one that I looked up to, my kids' grandfather that they'll never get to know. She took away our future with him. And yeah, it's horrible. Something that you can't get back. Sometimes I think about setting up a time to go and see her in prison and ask her for myself face to face. But then I go back and don't want to give her that time of day. Maybe someday I will.
Jim should be remembered as someone to aspire to on so many levels. As a father figure, as an entrepreneur, a business owner, there are a lot of outstanding qualities one would aspire to.
Jimmy was a truly compassionate and kind soul and giving. His daughters that have now taken over A1 Hawk, they completely live by his life with everything. The businesses ran the same exact way that Jim ran it, even listening to the same radio station for the past 8 years.
My sister and I having sticking together, and as much as we, it's hard, especially both being hurt, that we just have to stick together. Dad is still teaching us from up above. We think about all of the good memories that we had with our dad. He will never be forgotten. I don't think that there's an hour that goes by that he doesn't cross my mind.
Prayers for their success. For a short time, Chow and Hong felt a renewed sense of hope, believing that their financial struggles would soon be a thing of the past. Yet, as the months rolled by, the business did not recover. Instead of stepping back to reassess, the family found themselves caught in a cycle of desperation. Daphne insisted that the negative energy surrounding their business were exceptionally stubborn, requiring increasingly complex, expensive rituals to dismantle, trusting in her perceived spiritual authority. Chow and Hong continued to pour their remaining funds into her services, running up a staggering debt that eventually ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000. They were trapped in a web of spiritual promises and financial ruin, completely unaware the dark design's quiet greed was weaving around them. Chapter 3. A Morning of Devastation. The morning of June 10th, year 2012, began with a clear, pale blue sky over Arlington, but for the family of Long and Hong, it would forever be remembered as the day the light went out. At precisely 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers received an urgent, trembling phone call from Chow Tran. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that they had not answered their phone and that his family was growing deeply concerned. When the responding officers arrived at the quiet apartment complex, they found several family members gathered outside, their faces pale with anxiety. The officers noticed that one of the apartment windows was slightly ajar, which was highly unusual for the security-conscious elderly couple. Officer Weller, a seasoned officer with 14 years of experience, was the first to cross the threshold. Inside, the apartment was in complete disarray, bearing the typical, chaotic hallmarks of a burglary. Drawers were pulled out, belongings were scattered across the floor, and furniture was overturned. The officer called out, his voice echoing through quiet rooms, but only silence answered. He checked the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom, finding them completely empty. Finally, Officer Weller entered the bedroom. At first glance, the room appeared vacant, but as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught several smudges on the wall next to a small, unassuming closet door. A deep, instinctual hesitation washed over him, a quiet warning from within. Steeling his resolve, he gently pulled the closet door open. The sight that greeted him was one of profound tragedy. Restricting his description to respect the dignity of the departed, the officer discovered the gentle elderly couple, Long and Hong, bound tightly with heavy gray duct tape. It was immediately clear that they had suffered a violent assault and had passed away. Weller, despite his years of training, was left momentarily speechless by the sheer heartlessness of the act. He walked out into the living room, took a deep breath, and called for the homicide investigators and the crime scene unit. Chapter 4. The Stage Scene and the Cold Years. Detective Stewart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years on the force, arrived shortly after. He stood in the apartment, looking at the chaotic scene. The level of violence directed toward a sweet, harmless elderly couple who had no known enemies seemed completely senseless. As the crime scene technicians meticulously gathered evidence, they discovered several items that felt oddly out of place. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills and a discarded marijuana cigarette. Nearby, a light blue bandana was wrapped carefully around a glass beer bottle. At first glance, these items strongly suggested the involvement of local youth gangs, who were known to occasionally use specific colors as a calling card. However, Detective Stewart's seasoned instincts told him to look closer. The scene felt almost too perfect, as if someone had deliberately placed these items to tell a specific story to the police. He suspected the burglary and the gang signs were a sophisticated staging attempt designed to divert attention away from the true perpetrator. The subsequent autopsy at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office revealed a grim truth. The couple had not perished from physical trauma, but had suffocated due to the restrictive layers of duct tape applied to their faces. The sheer cruelty of the act suggested a deeply personal motive rather than a random, chaotic robbery. During the initial interviews, Chow Tran acted as a primary spokesperson for the grieving family, explaining that they had all been celebrating his father-in-law's birthday the evening before. He painted a picture of a close-knit, loving family, though he admitted the sewing business had been struggling. Shortly after the funeral, a standard notification from an insurance company revealed that Long and Hong carried a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million, with Chow Tran listed as a primary beneficiary. While this raised temporary questions, Chow explained that the policy was intended to ensure the continuity of their business. Without any concrete evidence, fingerprints, or matching hereditary codes from a crime scene, the investigation eventually stalled. The years stretched on, and the tragic files were placed into the cold case archives, waiting for a single spark of truth to light the way. Chapter 5. The Catalyst of Justice. That spark arrived unexpectedly in October of the year 2015. The path of justice is often winding, and in this case, it began with an unusual incident involving the theft of a horse in Houston. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for the offense, which constituted a felony in the state of Texas. Because of his felony conviction as an adult, his unique genetic profile was entered into the national database for the first time. Within days, the system flagged a miraculous match. The hereditary markers from the discarded marijuana cigarette found at the Arlington crime scene in 2012 belonged to Willie Guillory. At the time of the murders, Willie had been a mere 16-year-old youth with no prior adult record, explaining why his profile had never appeared in the database during the initial investigation. Detectives quickly brought Willie in for questioning, faced with the undeniable scientific evidence of his presence at the scene. The young man broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been led to Arlington by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 52-year-old man who was struggling financially at the time. More importantly, Willie pointed to the true architect of the tragedy, Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. Willie explained that Daphne was furious over the massive, unpaid debts owed to her by the family. She had approached Bobby Guillory, offering him $10,000 to carry out a dark deed to ensure she would collect her money through the couple's life insurance policies. Daphne had provided Bobby with a key to the apartment, which allowed the men to slip inside and stage the scene before the couple returned home. Chapter 6. The Verdict of Truth. Armed with this explosive information, detectives traveled to Katy, Texas, to arrest Bobby Guillory. When confronted, Bobby confirmed his nephew's story, expressing deep remorse for his role in the crime. He admitted that they had been desperate for money and had allowed themselves to be used as pawns by Daphne Wright, whom he described as a ruthless, greedy mastermind who demanded her money at any cost. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. When asked how Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment, Bobby stated that she had received it directly from Chow Tran himself. The revelation of Chow's complicity sent shockwaves through the department. The financial records subpoenaed by the state showed that shortly after tragedy, the sewing business had closed and Chow had purchased a beautiful new home. It became clear that Chow, trapped under the absolute spiritual and psychological control of Daphne, had agreed to a horrific arrangement. He claimed to his attorney that his mother-in-law, Hong, had offered herself as a sacrifice to save the family from Daphne's spiritual wrath. But investigators viewed this claim as an absurd attempt to justify a terrible betrayal driven by fear and financial greed. To secure a conviction against Daphne Wright, the individual who had orchestrated and funded the entire plot, prosecutors made a difficult choice. They offered Chow Tran immunity from prosecution in exchange for his full, detailed testimony against the others. The trial began on August 26, year 2019. On the witness stand, Chow portrayed Daphne as an incredibly manipulative and commanding figure who ruled her clients with fear, using their deep cultural beliefs and spiritual curses to extort hundreds of thousands of dollars. Though the defense argued that Chow was the true beneficiary of the insurance money and was using Daphne as a scapegoat, the jury ultimately saw through the deception. In September of the year 2019, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory likewise faced the legal consequences of their actions. While the legal battle concluded with the mastermind behind bars, the heavy weight of the tragedy remained. For the investigators who had dedicated years to seeking justice for Long and Hong, the immunity granted to Chow Tran was a difficult pill to swallow. Yet, as the community looked back on the lives of the gentle elderly couple, they chose to remember them not by the darkness of their final moments, but by the warmth, love, and enduring spirit community they had brought with them across the sea. The story of their journey stood as a powerful reminder of the precious nature of family, the danger of unchecked greed, and the ultimate, inescapable power of truth to shine light into the deepest dark. In the quiet expanse of Tarrant County, Texas, the city of Arlington stands as a vibrant tapestry of cultures. By the late 20th century and into the early years of the 21st century, a flourishing Vietnamese immigrant community had woven its dreams into the very fabric of the city. Among those who arrived with hopes as vast as the Texas sky were Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Le. They had immigrated from Vietnam in the year 2000, seeking what so many before them had sought, a peaceful, prosperous legacy for their 3 children and grandchildren. They were a sweet, hard-working, and generous couple, beloved by their neighbors and deeply rooted in their cultural heritage. To build their piece of the American dream, they established a commercial sewing business, relying on the help of their family, including their articulate son-in-law, Chow Tran, who often served as the public face of the enterprise because of his strong command of the English language. For nearly a decade, their efforts bore fruit, culminating in a highly lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a major commercial giant, a brand as universally recognized as Disney. Yet, as the year 2011 arrived, the tides of fortune began to shift. The contract was lost, and the family business began a slow, agonizing decline. Facing financial distress, the family turned to traditional beliefs in search of a solution. For thousands of years, many cultures have looked to spiritual practices to protect wealth and invite good fortune, desperate to lift what they feared was a persistent curse on their livelihood. Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, searched the local Vietnamese newspaper and discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based 250 miles away in Houston. Her name was Daphne Nguyen Wright, and she promised that she possessed a unique spiritual power to dispel negative energy, lift curses, and restore prosperity. Chow Tran made contact with Daphne, traveling to her Houston home for a consultation. There, she performed rituals meant to turn their fortunes around, leaving the family deeply hopeful that their dark days would soon be replaced by light. But behind the promise of spiritual sanctuary lay a web of insatiable greed. Over the course of a single year, instead of delivering good fortune, the arrangement spiraled into a devastating financial trap. Daphne began extending her services to the family on credit, and the debt quickly ballooned to an astronomical sum of somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. When the family found themselves utterly unable to pay, the spiritual advisor revealed a cold, predatory nature, learning that Chow Tran and his wife stood as the sole beneficiaries of substantial life insurance policies on the elderly couple, policies totaling at least $850,000. A dark plan began to take shape in the mind of the advisor. On the morning of June 10, 2012, at exactly 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers in Arlington received a tense call from 38-year-old Chow Tran. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that his family had gathered outside their apartment and noticed an open window, with things inside appearing to be in complete disarray. Responding quickly to the call, Officer Weller arrived at the scene. It was unusually early for a welfare check, and the sight of an entire family waiting anxiously outside the apartment immediately struck the officer as out of the ordinary. Upon entering the residence, Officer Weller found the telltale signs of a robbery. Furniture was overturned, and compact discs were scattered across the floor, suggesting a chaotic search for valuables. Initially, the officer believed the home to be empty after a quick glance into the bedroom, but as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught the faint, chilling sight of hand smudges on the wall next to a very small closet. Hesitating for a moment, guided by a deep sense of duty, Officer Weller opened the closet door. Inside, he discovered the tragic bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been hog-tied with duct tape, their heads and mouths completely covered. The brutality of the scene was shocking, even to a seasoned police force. Arlington homicide investigators, including a veteran detective with 21 years of experience, were called to the scene. The physical evidence initially pointed toward gang activity: a light blue bandana, a color associated with local Vietnamese gangs, was found wrapped around a beer bottle, and a marijuana cigarette along with crushed prescription pills were left on a table as if to suggest a robbery carried out by reckless use. However, experienced detectives soon grew skeptical. The crime scene appeared almost too perfect, as if it had been deliberately staged to lead investigators down a false path. Swabs of blood, hair fibers, and DNA from a marijuana cigarette were collected and sent for analysis, but when the results returned, they did not match any profiles in the federal database, known as CODIs, nor did they match any family members. The case grew cold, remaining unresolved for over 3 years. The breakthrough came in October of the year 2015. A young man named Willie Guillory, who had been 16 years old at the time of the murders, was arrested on a felony charge of horse theft in Houston. because a felony conviction requires a DNA profile to be entered into a national database. Willie's genetic information was finally uploaded. Instantly, the system signaled a perfect match to the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette left at the Arlington crime scene in 212. Arlington detectives acted swiftly, arresting Willie Guillory. Under questioning, the young man broke down and confessed, revealing that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory, a man who had no prior criminal record but was facing severe financial desperation after being laid off from his job. Bobby had been offered $10,000 by Daphne Wright to carry out the attack on the elderly couple. Daphne, acting as a spiritual loan shark, had demanded the deaths of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu so that the family could collect on the life insurance policies and pay off their massive debt to her. Most shocking of all was the revelation of how the killers had gained access to the apartment. Daphne had provided them with a key, which she had obtained directly from Chow Tran. In December of 2015, detectives located and arrested Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, Bobby also confessed, confirming that Daphne Wright was a mastermind who had orchestrated the entire plot. In August of 2016, investigators secured an arrest warrant for Daphne Wright. A search of her Houston home uncovered detailed ledgers documenting the exorbitant fees she charged her clients for spiritual services, with individual entries ranging from $10,000 to $40,000. To secure a conviction against the primary instigator of the crime, prosecutors made a difficult decision to offer immunity to Chow Tran in exchange for his full testimony. During the trial in August of 2019, Chow took the stand, portraying Daphne as a ruthlessly greedy woman who held a powerful psychological grip over his family. The defense argued passionately that Chow was a complicit partner who sought to pocket the $150,000 in insurance payouts for himself, highlighting the complete lack of written documentation regarding the alleged $280,000 debt. In September of 2019, the jury reached its verdict. Daphne Nguyen Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although the veteran investigators expressed deep frustration that Chow Tran escaped criminal prosecution due to his immunity agreement, they remained steadfast in their belief that truth and justice eventually prevail. The resolution of the case brought a solemn peace to the community, serving as a lasting testament to the tireless dedication of the investigators who refused to let a terrible wrong remain in the dark. The morning sun over Texas has a way of turning the vast, flat landscape into a canvas of bright gold and soft amber. In the city of Arlington, where the modern world blends seamlessly with the rich traditions of diverse cultures, the day usually begins with a quiet, predictable rhythm. Neighbors greet each other across neatly manicured lawns. The hum of early morning traffic plays a steady bass line in the distance, and the sweet scent of jasmine tea drifts from the open windows of family homes. For many years, this neighborhood had been a sanctuary of hope and new beginnings. It was a place where dreams were not just chased, but meticulously crafted, stitch by stitch, through hard work and unwavering faith. Among those who had woven their lives into the very fabric of this community were an elderly couple, whose love story was legendary among those who knew them. Chapter 1, A Legacy Built on Love. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu arrived in the United States in the year 2000, carrying with them little more than a few suitcases, a profound devotion to one another, and an enduring dream for their children and grandchildren. They had spent the first half of their lives in Vietnam, navigating the changing tides of history with grace and resilience. When they chose to settle in Arlington, Texas, they did so because they saw a thriving community where their heritage would be respected and their family could flourish. Long was a man of quiet dignity, with laugh lines etched deeply around his eyes, testifying to a lifetime of finding humor In the simplest of moments, he possessed an innate ability to make anyone feel at ease, often sharing gentle jokes and stories of his youth over cups of hot tea. Hong was his perfect counterpart. She was a woman of immense warmth and boundless energy, whose hands were rarely still. Whether she was tending to her garden, preparing a feast for her family, or guiding a needle with absolute precision, she did everything with a spirit of generosity. To watch them together was to witness a masterclass in partnership. They had been married for several decades, yet they still looked at each other with the same tenderness they had shared as young lovers. If Long was the steady anchor of the family, Hong was the sail, always pushing them forward toward new horizons. In Arlington, they established a commercial sewing business, a venture that quickly became a labor of love for the entire household. It was a modest enterprise at first, operating out of a small space filled with a rhythmic, comforting hum of industrial sewing machines. They specialized in creating beautifully crafted garments, and before long, their reputation for quality and reliability caught the attention of major distributors. To help manage the growing business, they enlisted the support of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a 38-year-old immigrant who possessed a strong command of the English language. Chow became the public face of the company, handling negotiations, communicating with contractors, and managing the day-to-day administrative tasks. For nearly a decade, the business thrived, securing contracts with prominent entertainment giants, including a lucrative arrangement to produce specialty items for Disney. During these prosperous years, the family home was a hub of laughter and celebration. Sunday dinners were a sacred tradition, where 3 generations would gather around a long wooden table laden with traditional Vietnamese dishes. Long would often raise a glass, his face glowing with pride. As he looked at his children and grandchildren, he would remind them that their success was not measured by the balance in their bank accounts, but by the love they shared and the integrity with which they lived their lives. Chapter 2: The Changing Winds. By the year 2011, however, the economic landscape began to shift. The highly coveted contract with the entertainment giant was lost, and the steady stream of orders that had once kept the sewing machines humming day and night began to dwindle. The sudden downturn cast a shadow of worry over the household. Long and Hong, ever resilient, tried to maintain an atmosphere of optimism, reminding their family that seasons of struggle were natural and that they had survived far worse trials in the past. Yet, as the financial pressures mounted, the family began to look for ways to restore their good fortune. In many traditional cultures, when hard work and practical effort seemed to fail, people turned to the spiritual realm for guidance and protection. For centuries, many have believed in the power of spiritual advisors to help clear away obstacles, lift perceived curses, and invite blessings of prosperity back into a home. It was during this period of uncertainty that Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong, began searching for a spiritual solution to their business troubles. In a local Vietnamese newspaper, they came across an advertisement for a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who operated out of Houston, approximately 250 miles away. The advertisement promised that she possessed a unique ability to remove negative energy, lift ancestral curses, and restore harmony and abundance to struggling businesses. Hoping to find a turning point for their beloved sewing business, Chow contacted Daphne and arranged for a consultation. Soon after, Chow and Hong traveled to Houston to meet with her. Daphne, a charismatic and direct woman, performed a series of traditional rituals designed to cleanse their business of bad luck. For a time, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. They returned to Arlington believing that the dark clouds would soon part and their sewing machines would once again sing with productivity. But as the months passed, the business did not recover. Instead of adapting to the new market realities, they found themselves slipping deeper into a financial entanglement with their spiritual advisor, whose fees for ongoing rituals and protective measures began to escalate dramatically. Chapter 3: The the dedicated seekers of justice. In the early morning hours of June 10th, the peaceful silence of the Arlington neighborhood was broken by a call to emergency services. Chow Tran requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, expressing deep concern that they were not answering their door and that their apartment appeared to be in disarray. When the responding officers arrived, they found the family gathered outside, filled with anxiety. The primary responding officer, a dedicated public servant with 14 years of experience, immediately sensed that this was no ordinary welfare check. The open window and the quiet stillness of the residence suggested that something was profoundly wrong. Upon entering the apartment, the officers discovered that a terrible tragedy had occurred. Long and Hong had been victims of a senseless and brutal act of violence. The home had been staged to look like a burglary gone wrong, complete with scattered belongings and items associated with local gang activity left behind as a false trail. For the veteran homicide investigators of the Arlington Police Department, the loss of this gentle, well-loved elderly couple was a deeply felt blow. The lead detective, a man who had dedicated 21 years of his life to investigating homicides, felt a profound responsibility to find the truth. He knew that Long and Hong had no enemies. They were cherished members of the community who had spent their lives helping others. The initial clues seemed almost too convenient. A light blue bandana wrapped around a beverage bottle was left in a prominent position, seemingly pointing toward local gangs. However, the seasoned investigators remained skeptical. Experienced detectives know that when a crime scene appears too perfect, it is often because someone has gone to great lengths to stage it. The investigators began a meticulous, exhaustive search for answers. They interviewed family members, spoke with neighbors, and collected physical evidence from the scene. They recovered genetic material from a cigarette left behind, hoping it would lead them to a suspect. Yet, when the samples were run to the national database, there were no matches. The case, despite the relentless efforts of the police, eventually went cold for 2 years. But true justice is a patient force, and the detectives refused to let the memory of Long and Hong fade into the past. Chapter 4. The Unraveling Thread. The breakthrough came in the autumn of the year 2015, proving that even the smallest, seemingly unrelated events can bring the truth to light. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for an unrelated offense. Because he had recently reached adulthood and was facing a felony charge, his genetic profile was entered into the national database for the first time. Within days, the system flagged a perfect match between Willie's genetic material and the evidence recovered from the Arlington crime scene 3 years prior. The Arlington detectives immediately traveled to interview the young man. When faced with the scientific evidence, the weight of his past actions became too heavy to bear. Willie broke down and confessed, explaining that he had been only 16 years old at the time of the incident and had been led astray by his uncle, Bobby Guillory. Willie revealed that they had been hired to carry out the act by Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. According to Willie, Daphne claimed that the elderly couple owed her a massive sum of money, somewhere between $200,000 and $50,000 and $280,000 for her spiritual services. When the family was unable to pay, Daphne's greed consumed her, and she sought to collect on the substantial life insurance policies held by the couple. Armed with this critical information, the detectives moved swiftly to arrest Bobby Guillory. Bobby, who had no prior criminal history, also confessed, confirming that Daphne had orchestrated the entire plan, promising him $10,000 to assist in the crime. As the investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a complex web of manipulation and misplaced trust. Daphne had built a lucrative business by preying on the fears and cultural beliefs of vulnerable families, charging tens of thousands of dollars for rituals. When her clients fell into deep debt, she used her perceived spiritual powers to control and intimidate them. The investigation ultimately revealed that Chow Tran had also become deeply entangled in Daphne's web. Terrified of the spiritual consequences of failing to pay her, and desperate to resolve the family's financial ruin, Chow had ultimately compromised his integrity, providing the key to the apartment under the belief that a tragic solution was the only way to satisfy the debt and protect his family from a spiritual curse. Chapter 5. The Triumph of Truth in Community. The trial of Daphne Wright in August of the year 2019 was a solemn and powerful moment for the Arlington community. It was a time of reckoning, where the deceptive practices of a manipulative individual were laid bare before the court of law. Chow Tran, having cooperated with the prosecution, provided crucial testimony that described how Daphne had used fear and psychological manipulation to control his mind and his family's actions. The defense argued that Chow was also complicit, but the jury focused on the mastermind who had directed the tragedy from behind the scenes. After a detailed presentation of the evidence, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced the legal consequences of their actions, ensuring that all those who played a part in conspiracy were held accountable. While the legal process brought a sense of closure, the true healing for the Arlington community came from remembering the beautiful lives of Long, Gwen, and Hong Lu. Their legacy was not defined by the tragic manner of their passing, but by the 20 years of love, kindness, and dedication they had poured into their family and their adopted home. The story of Long and Hong serves as an inspiring reminder of the power of community, the importance of protecting the vulnerable, and the enduring strength of love over greed. In the neighborhood where they once lived, the hum of sewing machines can still be heard from time to time, a comforting sound that reminds everyone of a couple who arrived with a dream and left behind a legacy of warmth, resilience, and hope. The morning sun in the state of Texas has a way of stretching across the flat, wide horizon like a warm, golden hand. It rises over the pine trees of the east and spills across the concrete ribbons of the highways, warming the brick-and-mortar homes of Arlington, a city nestled comfortably between the bustling hubs of Dallas and Fort Worth. In this place, where the wind smells of dry grass and distant barbecue smoke, thousands of families from all corners of the globe had come to plant their seeds, hoping the soil of the American dream would be kind to them. Among those who had crossed the vast, blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean were Long Nguyen and his devoted wife, Hong Lu. They were a couple who carried the quiet dignity of their homeland, Vietnam, in the very way they walked, spoke, and smiled. In the year 2000, when the world was celebrating the dawn of a new millennium, Long and Hong had packed their lives into a few suitcases, holding tight the hands of their children and grandchildren. They did not come with gold or grand promises, but they possessed an inexhaustible reservoir of determination, a deep love for one another, and a shared vision of a peaceful life where their descendants could flourish. Arlington, with its large, vibrant, and welcoming Vietnamese community, felt like the perfect sanctuary. It was a place where one could buy fresh ginger and jasmine rice at the local markets, hear the familiar melodic tones of their native tongue spoken on the streets, and yet still look up to see the broad, blue Texas sky. To build their legacy, Long and Hong did what they knew best. They possessed an extraordinary talent for craftsmanship, a precise and artistic understanding of fabric, thread, and needle. With the help of their family, they established a commercial sewing business. It was a modest operation at first, housed in a bright space filled with a rhythmic, comforting hum of sewing machines. The air was always thick with the scent of fresh cotton and the steam from heavy industrial irons. To bridge the gap between their traditional ways and the fast-paced American business world, they relied heavily on their son-in-law, Chow Tran. Chow was a young man of 38 years, energetic, eager to please, and blessed with a quick, friendly English vocabulary that made him the natural public face of the enterprise. Chow loved his family deeply. He took immense pride in walking into the offices of large commercial contractors, shaking hands with American executives, and negotiating deals that kept the family machines humming. For nearly 10 years, their hard work paid off in ways they had only dared to imagine in their quietest dreams. The pinnacle of their success arrived when they secured a lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a global commercial giant, none other than the legendary Disney enterprise. For a time, their workshop was filled with the bright, cheerful colors of beloved cartoon characters, and the future seemed as bright and secure as a summer day. Yet, as the wheel of fortune turns, the bright days eventually gave way to a season of shadow. By the year 2011, the global economy had shifted, contracts grew scarce, and the cherished agreement with the giant enterprise slipped through their fingers. The sewing machines, once a chorus of prosperity, fell silent one by one. The bills began to pile up on the kitchen table like dry leaves in autumn. For Long and Hong, who had survived wars and the monumental struggle of migration, this financial strain was not merely a matter of numbers. It felt like a spiritual weight, an invisible cloud of bad luck that had settled over their household. In traditional Asian culture, when hard work and practical effort seem to fail, it is natural to look beyond the physical world for answers. For thousands of years, people have believed in the delicate balance of spiritual energies, in the protective power of ancestral blessings, and the existence of unseen forces that can influence a person's destiny. Long and Hong, steeped in the mysticism of their homeland, became convinced that their business was not merely suffering from market downturns, but was under the heavy shadow of a curse. They felt they needed a spiritual protector, someone who could realign their fortunes and restore the harmony they had lost. It was during a quiet afternoon, while searching to the pages of a local Vietnamese newspaper, that Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong, discovered an advertisement that seemed to promise a beacon of hope. The advertisement belonged to a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who operated her practice some 250 miles away in the sprawling coastal city of Houston. Daphne advertised herself as a powerful medium, a woman capable of lifting the most stubborn of curses, invoking good fortune, and shielding families from spiritual harm. Her words held a magnetic appeal for a family standing on the precipice of financial ruin. Encouraged by Hong's deep faith, Chow made the long drive to Houston to seek a consultation. In a quiet neighborhood, they met Daphne, a woman of 44 years who carried herself with an immense, commanding presence. Daphne was married to a quiet man named Howard and was the mother of 3 daughters. In her home, she was the absolute center of gravity, loud, direct, and completely in control. To Chow and Hong, she appeared to be a figure of monumental authority, someone who possessed the keys to the spiritual realm. Daphne performed an elaborate ritual, burning sweet incense, chanting ancient prayers, and promising that the dark clouds hanging over their sewing business would soon scatter. The family returned to Arlington filled with a renewed sense of hope, believing their investment in faith would soon bear fruit. However, the spiritual assistance did not come without a price. What began as a simple consultation soon transformed into a complex web of financial demands. Daphne explained that the curse on their business was exceptionally deep and stubborn, requiring more elaborate, more frequent, and far more expensive rituals to dissolve. Desperate to keep their American dream alive, and terrified of the spiritual consequences of stopping the ceremonies, the family began to pour their remaining savings into Daphne's hands. As the months stretched into the year 2012, the sewing business did not recover. Instead of stepping back, Chow and Hong found themselves trapped in a psychological cage. They believed that if they stopped paying, the spiritual advisor would turn her formidable powers against them, transforming her protective prayers into a devastating curse. Daphne, sensing their absolute vulnerability, began to run her services on credit. The debt ballooned rapidly, climbing to a staggering sum between $250,000 and $280,000. It was a phantom debt, documented nowhere but in the ledger their own fear. To pay this impossible sum, a dark and tragic idea began to take root. Daphne, well aware that the family possessed substantial life insurance policies worth at least $1 million, suggested a terrible solution. If the elderly couple were to pass away, the insurance payout would easily clear the debt and secure the family's future. In the twisted logic of desperation and spiritual manipulation, the line between faith and greed became fatally blurred. On the morning of June Muoy, 2012, the quiet neighborhood of Arlington was shattered when Chow Tran called emergency dispatchers, requesting a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. He explained to the operator, in a voice tight with anxiety, that his family had gone to the apartment and noticed an open window, with things inside appearing to be in complete disarray. Terrified of what they might find, they waited outside for the arrival of the police. When Officer Weller, a dedicated public servant, arrived at the apartment, he immediately sensed that this was no ordinary call. The morning was exceptionally early, a time when the neighborhood was usually wrapped in peaceful silence. Upon entering the residence, Weller observed the classic signs of a burglary. Drawers were pulled open, items were scattered across the floor, and the living room was in complete disarray. He called out, his voice echoing off the walls, but received no response. He checked the kitchen and the bathroom, finding them empty. Finally, he turned his attention to the master bedroom. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty, and Weller felt a brief sense of relief, imagining the elderly couple had simply gone for an early morning walk to enjoy the cool Texas air. But as he turned to leave, his flashlight beam caught a series of dark hand smudges on the wall next to a remarkably small closet. A cold instinct, born of years on the beat, urged him to pause. He opened the closet door, and the reality of human cruelty laid itself bare. Inside the cramped space lay Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been bound tightly, their heads and mouths covered, and they had tragically succumbed to suffocation. The shock of the discovery sent waves of grief and disbelief through the Arlington Police Department. Homicide detectives, including seasoned veterans with over 21 years of experience, arrived at the scene. They were met with a baffling array of clues. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills and a marijuana cigarette. Wrapped around a nearby beer bottle was a light-colored blue bandana. To the detectives, these items looked like the distinct calling cards of an active local gang, a sign that perhaps a robbery had gone terribly wrong. Yet, as the investigation unfolded, the experienced detectives began to harbor doubts. The scene felt too perfect, too deliberately staged to point the finger at local street youth. It was as if someone had read a manual on gang activity and tried to recreate it in the apartment. They carefully collected every piece of evidence, including the genetic profiles from the marijuana cigarette, hoping the national database, known as a combined deoxyribonucleic acid index system, would yield a match. But the results returned empty, suggesting the perpetrator had no prior felony convictions. For 3 long years, the case remained cold, a solemn shadow over the Arlington community. The memory of the sweet, hard-working couple who had only ever wanted to build a good life for their family kept the detectives searching for answers. Then, in the year 2015, the wheel of justice turned once more in the most unexpected way. In a neighboring county, a young man named Willie Guillory, who was 16 years old at the time of the tragedy, was arrested for a felony involving the theft of a horse. Because he had transitioned into adulthood and was convicted of a felony, his genetic profile was entered into the national database. Within days, the computer system signaled a perfect match. The genetic material left on the staged marijuana cigarette at the crime scene in 212 belonged to Willie Guillory. When detectives brought Willie in for questioning, the weight of his conscience proved too heavy to bear. He broke down in tears, confessing that he'd been brought along by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 52-year-old man who had been struggling financially after being laid off from his job. Bobby had been recruited by Daphne Wright, who promised him the sum of $10,000 to carry out the deed. Daphne, the spiritual advisor, wanted her money, and she had orchestrated the entire plot to collect on the family's life insurance policies. Bobby Guillory was soon arrested, and he too confessed, revealing the shocking depth of the betrayal. He claimed that the key to the apartment had been provided by none other than Chow Tran himself, who had left it under a welcome mat. The web of spiritual manipulation, greed, and desperation had led to an unspeakable tragedy. To secure a conviction against the mastermind, prosecutors made a difficult decision, offering Chow Tran immunity in exchange for his full and truthful testimony. On August 26, 2000 Muoy Chin, the trial of Daphne Wright began. Chow took the stand, portraying Daphne as a powerful, greedy woman who had used her spiritual influence to control his mind and dominate his family. The defense argued fiercely that Chow was a complicit actor who had sought the $850,000 insurance payout for his own gain, but the jury ultimately focused on the architect of the crime. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would never again exploit the faith of vulnerable families. Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced the consequences of their actions, while the community of Arlington began the long, quiet process of healing. Though the road to justice was long and filled with sorrow, it served as a powerful reminder of the resilience of love, the importance of truth, and the enduring strength of a community united against greed. The morning sun of Texas has a way of climbing over the horizon like a slow, heavy wave of gold, spreading its warmth across the quiet suburbs of Arlington. In the early hours of June 10, 2012, the streets were mostly silent, save for the occasional chirp of a morning bird or the distant hum of a passing delivery truck. It was a day that began with a sense of peace, a day that promised the quiet rhythms of summer. Yet, beneath the surface of this tranquil neighborhood, a deeply unsettling mystery was about to unfold, one that would challenge a veteran police force, test the bonds of a hard-working immigrant family, and ultimately remind everyone of the delicate balance between hope, desperation, and the pursuit of truth. To understand the story that transpired in Arlington, one must first look back to the turn of the century, to the year 2000, when an elderly couple named Long Nguyen and Hong Le made a monumental decision. They chose to leave behind the familiar landscapes of Vietnam, packing up their dreams and their cherished memories to cross the ocean. They brought with them their 3 adult children and their grandchildren, seeking what so many before them had sought, the American dream. Arlington, a vibrant city nestled within Tarrant County, welcomed them with its broad streets and diverse communities. Over the decades, especially after the historic events of 1975, Arlington had become a sanctuary for a large, thriving Vietnamese community. Families who had traveled across the world found comfort in building a new life together here, blending their deep-rooted cultural heritage with the dynamic opportunities of American commerce. They established businesses, built community centers, and raised children who spoke fluent English while still honoring the traditions of their elders. Long and Hong were a beloved part of this community. Neighbors knew them as a kind, gentle couple who never bothered anyone. They were hard-working and generous, always ready with a warm smile or a helpful gesture. To look at them was to see the very picture of resilience. Upon settling in Texas, they established a commercial sewing business. To help bridge the cultural and linguistic gap, they enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a sharp 38-year-old immigrant who spoke excellent English. Chow became the public face of the enterprise, negotiating contracts, talking to suppliers, and handling the complex paperwork of American business. For nearly a decade, their efforts bore sweet fruit. The hum of sewing machines in their workshop was the sound of progress. They secured lucrative contracts, including prestigious agreements to manufacture garments for major commercial giants, even producing items for global brands like Disney. They were a prominent family, respected and admired. However, by the year 2011, the winds of fortune began to shift. Global markets fluctuated, contracts were lost, and the steady stream of income that had sustained the family began to dry up. The loss of the Disney contract was a particularly heavy blow. The sewing machines grew quiet, and anxiety settled over the household like persistent fog. In times of deep financial distress, people often look backward to find a path forward, searching for answers in the spiritual traditions of their ancestors. In many traditional Asian cultures, there is a deep belief in the ebb and flow of cosmic luck. For thousands of years, people have prayed to the lucky gods and protectors of wealth to guard their businesses and bring prosperity. When a family faces an overwhelming crisis, such as impending bankruptcy or legal trouble, they may seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor. These advisors are believed to possess the rare ability to lift curses, restore harmony, and heal the invisible rifts that block the flow of good fortune. Desperate to save the family legacy, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Lu, began searching for a spiritual solution. In the pages of a local Vietnamese newspaper, they discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, some 250 miles away. Her name was Daphne Wright. She claimed to possess the power to lift dark curses, invite prosperity, and alter the course of destiny. To a family standing on the precipice of financial ruin, her promises sounded like a lifeline. Chow contacted Daphne, and she agreed to meet him at her Houston home for a consultation. The family placed their ultimate trust in her, hoping that through ancient rituals and spiritual intervention, their business would once again thrive. They could not have known that this search for a spiritual savior would slowly entangle them in a web of greed, manipulation, and tragedy. 1 year later, on the morning of June 10, 2012, at 7:29 in the morning, the peace of Arlington was shattered. Chow Tran placed an urgent call to emergency dispatchers, requesting a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. He explained to the dispatcher that his family had gathered outside the apartment of 70-something Long Nguyen and his wife Hong Lu. They had knocked on the door, but there was no answer. His teenage son had peeked through a window and noticed that things inside looked incomplete. Disarray, terrified of what they might find, the family waited outside for the authorities to arrive. Officer Weller, a dedicated officer with 14 years of experience, was the first to arrive on the scene. He noted that the gathering of an entire family outside an apartment so early in the morning was highly unusual for a typical welfare check. Walking up to the residence, he saw the open window and the signs of a potential break-in. Upon entering the apartment, the scene appeared to confirm a burglary gone wrong. Furniture was overturned, and compact discs were scattered across the floor, as if someone had ransacked the living room in a frantic search for valuables. Officer Weller called out, his voice echoing to the silent rooms, but no one answered. The kitchen was empty, the bathroom was clear. The only room left to check was the bedroom. Officer Weller stepped inside. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty. He began to turn around, ready to tell the waiting family that their loved ones were not there, when his flashlight illuminated the wall next to a small closet. There, clear as day, were dark smudges on the plaster, as if someone had desperately grabbed the wall. A heavy silence filled the room. An instinct, honed by years of police work, warned him that something was terribly wrong. Slowly, he reached out and opened the closet door. Inside, hidden away in the dark, lay the motionless bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been bound with duct tape, their heads and mouths heavily wrapped. The sheer brutality of the scene left the experienced officer in absolute shock. He walked out of the bedroom, unable to speak or even use his radio for several long moments, before finally composing himself to request a supervisor and a crime scene unit. Detective Stewart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years on the force, soon arrived at the apartment. Even for him, this was one of the most devastating and violent crime scenes he had ever witnessed. It was clear that a terrible struggle had taken place near the front entrance, with blood transfer on the walls and carpet, indicating the victims had been attacked the moment they stepped through their door. On the coffee table, investigators found unusual items: a plate of crushed prescription pills and a discarded marijuana cigarette, alongside a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle. To the detectives, these items look almost like a calling card left by one of the active Vietnamese street gangs, known to operate in the area. These gangs were notorious for extorting local businesses, and at first, it seemed the family had fallen victim to a violent extortion plot. Yet, as Detective Stewart examined the scene more closely, a sense of skepticism began to take root. In his decades of investigating homicides, he knew that real gang violence rarely left such convenient, perfectly placed clues. The scene felt staged, as if someone had gone to great lengths to paint a picture of gang activity to steer investigators down a false path. The next step was to interview the grieving family. Chow Tran, being the primary English speaker, met with Detective Stewart. He explained that the night before, the entire family had gathered to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. Long and Hong had stayed at the party until 10 o'clock in the evening, after which another family member had driven them home. That was the last time they were seen alive. Chow mentioned that while the family's sewing business had been struggling, he could not think of anyone who would want to harm the gentle couple. An autopsy conducted the following day at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office revealed a heartbreaking truth. While the victims had suffered blunt force injuries, their actual cause of death was suffocation due to layers of duct tape wrapped tightly around their faces. It was a slow, incredibly painful way to pass, suggesting a level of cruelty that felt deeply personal. As the investigation progressed, a surprising call from an insurance company changed the entire trajectory of the case. The representative informed Detective Stewart that Long and Hong carried a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million. When the detective inquired about the beneficiaries, one name stood out: Chow Tran. Detectives brought Chow in for further questioning on June 13, 2012. Chow was entirely cooperative, explaining that the policy was intended to ensure the survival of the family business should anything happened to the elders. He provided an airtight alibi for himself and the rest of the family, explaining that they had been playing cards together until late into the night. To verify his story, police collected DNA and fingerprint samples from Chow and other relatives. Comparing them to the evidence found at the crime scene, a distinct DNA profile was successfully extracted from the discarded marijuana cigarette. Investigators hoped this would lead them directly to the killer. However, when the results came back from the national database, there was no match. The DNA did not belong to any family member, nor did it match any known offenders in the federal system. The investigation slowly ground to a halt. For 2 long years, no new leads materialized, and the case of the gentle sewing business owners grew cold. The detectives, however, refused to forget the quiet couple who had traveled so far only to meet such a tragic end. The breakthrough came in the autumn of 2015, through an entirely unexpected turn of events. A 16-year-old youth named Willie Guillory had been arrested for a felony horse theft in Houston because he was a minor at the time of the 2012 murders. His DNA had never been entered into the national database. But now, as an adult with a felony conviction, his genetic profile was uploaded into the system. Almost immediately, the computer flagged a perfect match. The DNA on the marijuana cigarette left at the Arlington crime scene belonged to Willie Guillory. On October 17, 2015, detectives arrested Willie on a parole violation and brought him into the interrogation room, confronted with the scientific evidence placing him inside the apartment. The young man broke down in tears. He confessed to his presence at the scene, but insisted he was merely a pawn. He had been brought along by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory, to assist with what he believed was a simple burglary. According to Willie, his Uncle Bobby had been given a key to the apartment to make the break-in look authentic. They had intentionally thrown items around, left the blue bandana, the beer bottle, and the crushed pills to stage a gang-related robbery. When the elderly couple returned home unexpectedly, the situation escalated into violence. After incapacitating the couple, Bobby and Willie bound them with duct tape and placed them in the closet before fleeing back to Houston. When asked why they would target a couple they did not even know, Willie revealed a shocking detail. It was a murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by a woman named Daphne Wright, the very spiritual advisor the family had hired years before. Willie explained that Daphne had claimed the couple owed her an enormous sum of money and that she wanted them dead if they did not pay. Armed with this revelation, the focus of the investigation shifted to Daphne Wright. Detectives discovered that her spiritual practice was highly lucrative, charging clients tens of thousands of dollars for rituals. When they attempted to speak with Chow Tran about a connection to Daphne, Chow suddenly refused to speak without his attorney present. On December 16, 2015, police arrested Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas. Facing capital murder charges, Bobby also confessed, pointing the finger directly at Daphne. He explained that he had been in desperate financial straits after being laid off and that Daphne had offered him $10,000 to carry out the deed. Bobby revealed that Chow and Hong had run up a massive debt with Daphne for her spiritual services, a sum ballooning to between $250,000 and $280,000 because they could not pay. Daphne had devised a plan to collect on the couple's life insurance policies. Most shocking of all, Bobby claimed that the key to the apartment had been provided by Chow Tran himself. Detectives traveled to Houston to arrest Daphne Wright. A search of her home revealed detailed ledgers listing extraordinary fees for her spiritual services, confirming the massive scale of her financial exploitation. In exchange for his full testimony against Daphne and Bobby, prosecutors offered Chow Tran immunity. It was a difficult decision, a deal with the devil, but necessary to secure a conviction against the true mastermind of the conspiracy. During the trial in August of 2019, Chow took the stand. He painted a picture of a family entirely dominated by fear of Daphne's alleged spiritual powers, claiming they believed she could place a devastating curse on their children if they failed to pay. He even claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had suggested sacrificing herself so the family could use the insurance money to clear their spiritual debt. The defense strongly contested this, arguing that Chow had orchestrated the plot out of pure financial greed to pocket the substantial insurance payout. In September of 2019, the jury reached its verdict. Daphne Wright was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby Guillory also received a life sentence for his role in the crime. While the legal proceedings came to a close, the story left a lasting impression on the community of Arlington. It stood as a somber reminder of the dangers of extreme desperation and the tragic consequences of placing blind faith in those who prey on the vulnerable. Yet, in the quiet neighborhood where the sewing machines once hummed, the memory of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu endured, not for the tragedy that befell them, but for the decades of love, hard work, and dedication they poured into building a beautiful life for the family they cherished above all else. The morning air in Arlington, Texas, was usually heavy with the promise of summer heat, but on the 10th of June in the year 2012, there was a strange, quiet stillness that hung over the neighborhood. The city of Arlington had grown over the decades into a vibrant tapestry of cultures, home to a large and close-knit Vietnamese community that had flourished since the late 1970s. Among them were families who had built their lives from the ground up, bringing with them their cherished traditions, their culinary secrets, and an unwavering belief in the power of hard work and family unity. At 7:29 in the morning, The calm of the day was gently broken by a phone call to the emergency dispatchers. On the other end of the line was Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant who worked tirelessly to support his family. His voice, though trying to remain calm, carried an undercurrent of deep concern. He was calling to request a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. The dispatcher, speaking with a steady, reassuring tone characteristic of emergency professionals, asked for the names of the individuals in question. Chow carefully spelled them out, explaining that his father-in-law was named Long Nguyen and was currently in his 70s. As Chow spoke, his anxiety seemed to mount. He explained to the dispatcher that his wife, his son, and he had gone to the residence to check on them, only to find that things were not as they should be. They had noticed that a window to the apartment was wide open, and the general state of the exterior looked highly unusual. Too terrified to step inside the dark, quiet apartment themselves, the family gathered on the manicured lawn outside, waiting anxiously for the arrival of the police. It was an unusual sight for that time of morning. When Officer Weller arrived on the scene, he immediately sensed that this was not a routine welfare check. Normally, requests to check on the well-being of citizens came later in the day, and they rarely involved an entire family standing outside in a state of quiet panic. Officer Weller, a seasoned veteran of the force with 14 years of experience, walked up to the family. He offered them a reassuring smile, hoping to ease their worries. He then turned his attention to the apartment. As he crossed the threshold, the silence inside was heavy. He began to call out, his voice echoing softly against the walls, but there was no answer. The living room was in complete disarray, displaying all the classic signs of a burglary. Drawers were pulled open, compact discs were scattered across the floor, and furniture was moved out of place. Officer Weller checked the kitchen and the bathroom, finding both empty. He then proceeded to the master bedroom. Initially, the room appeared vacant. He turned around, preparing to leave the apartment to inform the family that no one was inside and perhaps the elderly couple had simply gone for an early morning walk in the park. However, as he reached the bedroom doorway, the beam of his flashlight caught something unusual. On the wall next to a very small, inconspicuous closet, there were faint hand smudges. It was a detail that a less experienced eye might have missed, but Weller hesitated. A quiet instinct told him that something was not right. Steeling himself, he turned back and slowly opened the small closet door. Inside, the officer's heart sank. He discovered the elderly couple, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They were bound tightly with heavy duct tape, and their heads and mouths were fully covered. There was no life left in them. The scene was incredibly difficult for the veteran officer to process. For a moment, the weight of the tragedy left him unable to speak or even use his radio. He walked back into the center of the living room, standing in silence as he gathered his thoughts, before finally calling for his supervisor and the crime scene unit. When the Arlington homicide investigators arrived, led by Detective Stewart, they were equally struck by the gravity of the scene. Detective Stewart had spent 21 years in the homicide department, witnessing many challenging cases, but this one felt deeply personal and unnecessarily cruel. The initial evidence pointed toward a robbery gone wrong, but the sheer level of violence and the careful way the scene was arranged made the detectives highly skeptical. As the crime scene technicians began their meticulous work, they discovered several items that felt almost too convenient for a standard robbery. On the coffee table lay a plate with crushed prescription pills, and nearby was a partially smoked marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana wrapped tightly around a glass beer bottle. To some, this would immediately suggest local gang activity, as light blue was a color associated with certain active groups in the area. However, Detective Stewart and his team knew that real gang members rarely left such obvious, stylized calling cards at a crime scene. It felt staged, like a scene from a television show designed to point investigators in the wrong direction. The detectives decided to treat the gang theory with caution while they waited for forensic laboratory to process the physical evidence, including the hair fibers, the duct tape, and the biological samples from the marijuana cigarette. To understand why anyone would want to harm such a gentle couple, the investigators turned to the community. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu were beloved figures in the Arlington Vietnamese neighborhood. Having immigrated to the United States in the year 2000, they had spent over a decade building a beautiful life. They had established a commercial sewing business, employing several family members, and eventually securing a major contract to manufacture garments for a prominent entertainment giant. Chow Tran, the son-in-law, had been the public face of the sewing business because his English was the most fluent. He was known as a hard-working family man who cared deeply for his in-laws. However, by the year 2011, the family's business faced severe challenges. They lost their primary contract, and the business began to decline rapidly. In their search for a solution to their financial worries, the family looked to the traditional beliefs of their homeland. In many traditional cultures, when a family experiences a sudden turn of misfortune, they may believe that a spiritual cloud or a curse has settled over them. To lift this perceived burden, people sometimes seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor. Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Lu, searched through local Vietnamese publications and found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, approximately 250 miles away. The advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright, claimed she could remove bad luck and bring prosperity back to struggling families. Hoping to restore their family legacy, Chow contacted Daphne and arranged a meeting at her Houston home. Over the course of many months, the family became deeply dependent on her rituals. What began as a simple consultation soon spiraled into a complex web of financial obligations. Because the business did not recover, the family continued to request more intensive rituals, which Daphne happily provided on credit. Over time, the debt ballooned to an astronomical sum, somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. As the investigation continued into the summer of 2012, the detectives discovered that the deceased couple held a very substantial life insurance policy, valued at approximately $1 million. When Detective Stewart inquired about the beneficiaries, he learned that Chow Tran was one of the primary recipients. When interviewed, Chow explained that the policy was designed to ensure the survival of the family business in the event of tragedy. He and his family provided a detailed, consistent timeline of their whereabouts on the night of the incident, explaining they had been celebrating Long's birthday at a family gathering until late in the evening. With no direct evidence linking Chow or any other family member to the crime scene, and with the laboratory reports showing that the biological samples from the marijuana cigarette did not match anyone in the national database, the case slowly went cold. For over 2 years, the file sat on Detective Stewart's desk, a quiet reminder of an unsolved mystery. Then, in the year 2015, a sudden breakthrough occurred. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for a felony involving the theft of a horse. Because he was now an adult facing a felony charge, his biological profile was entered into the national database within days. The system flagged a perfect match between Willie's profile and the biological material recovered from the marijuana cigarette left at the Arlington crime scene in 2012. On the 17th of October in 2015, Willie Guillory was brought in for questioning. When confronted with the scientific evidence placing him inside the apartment, the young man broke down and confessed. He revealed that he had been only 16 years old at the time of the incident and had been led into the situation by his uncle, Bobby Guillory. Willie explained that his uncle Bobby had been struggling financially after being laid off from his job. Bobby had been approached by Daphne Wright, who was a close acquaintance. Daphne had complained that a family in Arlington owed her a significant amount of money and refused to pay. She offered Bobby $10,000 to travel to Arlington and handle the situation. According to Willie, Daphne had even provided them with a key to the apartment, so they could enter without forcing the door, instructing them to stage the scene to look like a random burglary. With this crucial information, the police arrested Bobby Guillory on 2 counts of capital murder. Faced with the confession of his nephew and the progress of the investigation, Bobby also confessed. He confirmed that Daphne Wright was a mastermind behind the entire plot. He explained that Daphne had discovered the existence of the large life insurance policies and realized that the only way she would ever recover her $280,000 was if the couple passed away, allowing Chow to collect the insurance money and settle the debt. The most shocking revelation came when Bobby claimed that the key to the apartment had been placed under a doormat by Chow Tran himself, under instructions from Daphne. When detectives attempted to speak with Chow again, he immediately referred them to his legal representative. In August of 2016, the police arrested Daphne Wright at her Houston home. A search of her residence revealed detailed ledger books documenting that she had charged various clients tens of thousands of dollars for her spiritual services. To secure a conviction against Daphne, whom prosecutors believed was the true puppet master behind the tragedy, the state offered Chow Tran immunity from prosecution in exchange for his full and truthful testimony. During the trial in August of 2019, Chow took the stand. He described Daphne as an incredibly manipulative and greedy individual who exerted immense psychological control over his family. He claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had been so desperate to protect her family from Daphne's spiritual threats that she had even suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money. The defense team strongly challenged Chow's credibility, arguing that he was a true beneficiary of the $850,000 of insurance payouts and had used the situation to his own financial advantage. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory also faced justice for their roles in the crime. While the legal proceedings concluded, the memories of Long Nguyen and Hong Liu remained clear in the hearts of those who knew them. The community in Arlington slowly healed, drawing strength from their shared values of unity, mutual support, and resilience. The story serves as a profound reminder of the dangers of greed and the enduring importance of